On OBS, you have desktop.
Alright, is this coming through? Do you hear me?
Yep.
Do you hear yourself? Okay, there we go. I just had to change the audio input since I've got the new microphone. Alright. So,
But I definitely hear you. Oh, I think it worked.
Okay, well I think we're set then.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, there we go.
New headset does wonders, messes everything up. Alright, so we'll reintroduce since apparently no audio is going through. Today's Sundered Ages Talks, episode 7. Today we're talking about feats. Feats. We already made a joke, everybody gets 2.
Woo! Yeah. They only get 2. They only get 2. I think, and then all the other systems, depending on which one you've played, you either got none or you got a ton, and you're probably disappointed at least a little bit. But feats are great. I think I'm going to start off with the things I like about feats, because traditionally, so I started personally with playing Pathfinder. That was the first one I played. That's what I played the most of, other than Sundered Ages. I've played Sundered Ages the most at this point now, but I played Pathfinder for a while, and Pathfinder had feats, right? You got them every so many class levels, and it was great. You know, fighters got more, humans got more, but they were awesome. And if you had a great DM, sometimes you got even more, or you had like Gestalt levels or something like that. And the cool thing about feats were back in the day, that's basically how you separated yourself, right? That's all rogues are the same except for their feats. Like, they all have the same class abilities. Yeah, they have different ability scores, but they do inherently the same things, except for the one that takes weapon finesse, or they take some sort of bow proficiency and shot on the run, things like that. That inherently is the type of thing that makes people different. So I think the reason feats are so important is because you can sort of see the transition into a classless system where if feats are the thing that separate everybody, a classless system, you know, can kind of adopt that as another way for people to be different. Fourth edition, from my research, basically they had feats, but I don't think. Let me see. Doesn't give you a new. It just it improves on stuff. So they weren't like new abilities, because everybody did the same thing plus flavor text. They didn't want anybody to be any stronger than anybody else, so you couldn't have feats that made you different. You just had feats that made you stronger at a certain thing. And that's
what's that? Diagonal strike. What's that? Arcane attack. What's that? Rangery stealth. 1 weapon plus modifier.
Yeah, so it sucked. I mean, I don't really have to talk too much more about 4th edition and anything about it. Everything they did was pretty terrible. 5th edition has feats, but they're optional. So it's a little bit closer to 3rd and 3.5 Pathfinder, but it's also pretty close to 4th edition, where you level and everything in your level kind of updates itself, and you don't really need to do feats. They seem more or less optional for the people who, I think they put it for the people who've been playing a long time, and they want that sense of like, build my own character. I don't know why anybody wouldn't want that, but it was optional, and I think it was dumb to do that. I think feats, again, make the game more dynamic. So I'm glad that feats existed in the first place. I think Wizards and Paizo had something right with the feats idea. I think they kind of lost that idea as time has gone on, and I'm a little distressed about it, because, again, it's the thing that made everybody different. That's whatever you specialized in is the thing that the story you tell is pretty much based off of the feats that you did, right? Because So
I mean, so basically what you've answered is the first thing we wanted to touch on tonight, which is feats traditionally, what role do they serve in the D20 system?
Right.
And like you said, feats are what you used to differentiate your character from another character that had the same class. Or even if you were like a ranger and there was a rogue in the party, and you both might have had some overlap. Like maybe you both were good at reconnaissance, maybe you both were good at something else. Um, the feats could help determine, oh, okay, well, the ranger, despite having the skill set to do a lot of the sneaky type stuff, his feats were all put into offensive things to make him better with his bow or dual wielding, all of his feats were put into making his skills better for animal husbandry, tracking, these sorts of things, or his feats were like some people that didn't know what feats to take, and they took the ones that added to fortitude and reflex and will, which those feats always seem like someone had a good idea, and they went like a third of the way with it. Like I think what is like iron will, lightning reflexes, and no, it's not great fortitude.
Yeah, I think it's great fortitude. Yeah.
Whatever it is, those seem like those would have been really good first tier feats. And then you could have taken another one that was like, okay, so you took lightning reflexes as the gateway to being able to take like an improved evasion type feat for anyone, right? Or iron will would have led to a thing where like, okay, well you have a +2 to will, and then the next feat you take is you get to re-roll a will save like once per day, so that people might actually have ever taken iron will or greater fortitude or lightning reflexes. Either way though, so the feats, they differentiate. But some people might say, okay, but I differentiated based on what race I'm playing or what class I'm playing. And so the second step of this would be classes, they are different, and what makes classes different? Traditionally it was, what your attack modifier is, what your strong saves were, your health pool, and then your abilities. But there's some crossover here, and that is feats and abilities, especially in third edition 3.5 and Pathfinder, had a significant amount of overlap, especially for some classes like Monk, and Monk, Rogue, and Fighter, where most of Fighter's abilities were feats. But so, how do you see the feats and class abilities? Like, where's the overlap there? And do you think that the way that it was traditionally done, did it take away from class individuality, or do you think it was a boon to it?
Right. So, so the difference obviously being any class should more or less be able to take any feat, right? So it's the open market of being different, even though anybody can do it regardless of what your class is, and then class abilities are specific to that class. So monks can only do the things with chi and shit like that. Rogues were the only one who had sneak attack, I want to say. That was a class ability. So, you'd see barbarians taking levels in rogues so they could do sneak attacks because they're always doing melee, things like that. Whereas feats, anybody could do blacksmithing. Anybody could learn to use a bow, even though it didn't really make sense for some people. Anybody could take improved initiative. So I think
everyone took improved initiative.
Yeah, well, if you were smart, you did. I see there being the obvious, like, when you start making the system and you want to separate them out, like only this type of person should be able to do this. On paper, it seems like the right thing to do. Like, you should have to be able to limit yourself for something this strong. Not everybody should be able to have sneak attacks, because that's just seems too strong, right? If I give, the barbarian a sneak attack, if he could take a feat to get a sneak attack, he's just pushing out more damage. Or if the fighter can take, something to for lay on hands, and he's basically a paladin, like, he's just too strong, especially in 5th edition he had some like crazy regenerative ability, like you just couldn't kill him. So it's like you have to separate them somehow, because they're taking essentially what would be the greatest feats and turning them into class abilities, because those are the really strong things you can do. and then the feats are sort of toned down things that anybody can do, and it just makes you a little bit different. That's how it's always been. I feel like that's what Pathfinder really had was, I have my rogue. I chose rogue because I know I wanted to play a stealthy character, and then I further defined him with feats. Now I could have played a fighter the same way. I could have played a stealthy fighter, honestly, because you still had skill points, right? I would have been terrible at it.
Really bad.
Yeah, I would have been like subpar. Better than a fighter who didn't take the skill points at all, but still not great. But I wouldn't have gotten the sneak attack. I could just never get it. Like, there's nothing I could ever do. But I could take like shot on the run. So if I wanted to do sneak attacks within 30 feet, I had to be a rogue. But if I wanted to be someone who was subpar at sneaking, but did a little bit more damage, and could shoot bows, while moving and stuff, which was a thing I was totally into with like Dungeons and Dragons Online. I don't know why, but I always made that character. I had to do it as like I would pick a fighter. So I think the big separation was, at least at first, we had this, and this is sort of like what we were talking about with spells. There's like the few dozen that you're like, this is really good. We have to have this. Like, everybody's going to want to have this, but we have to separate them out, because if everybody can have, lay on hands and sneak attack and this, it's going to be way too strong. We can't make those feats.
And that specifically, though, is something I want to touch on. So let's, right there.
Okay.
There was always a good amount of feats, but I agree. I think that depending on the type of character you were playing, depending on the class, really, that you were playing, there were either a handful of good feats to choose from, or a myriad of good feats. Specifically because if you were playing, example, like a ranger in Pathfinder in 3rd or 3.5, probably just about a third of your class abilities, the things that were supposed to make you special. You had the animal companion, you had the ranger spells, and then you got bonus feats that were already chosen for you, right? You could choose to get like the weapon focus, or no, you could choose like the extra shot feats and whatnot for bows, or you could take the dual wield. So already, like, that's a class ability being given up. And in its place, you're getting a feat. The fighter was the same way. You got very few actual class abilities. You just got a boatload of feats. And then on the other end of it is, I think, the one that benefited the absolute most as far as crazy things you could do was the monk. As every edition of the book of the systems that came out, 3rd edition, all the splat books, 3.5, all the splat books, Pathfinder, all the splat books, you'd see over and over and over from monks feats that weren't just like add 3 to your climb check, add 4 to your initiative, add +1 to your weapon focus with a certain weapon, but like, Medusa's Strike, Tiger Stance, Eagle's Flight, like all these really cool, and on a certain level, they are flavor text. But they were, as weird as it sounds, they were a type of flavor text 4th edition attack when no one else had them, right? So it was like, you're a monk, and you could hit someone for your unarmed damage. You're a mid-level monk. You're okay, so like 1d10, whatever, and do your strength modifier. Or you could do like the Tiger Strike, and the Tiger Strike meant you used up 1 of your like key pool points. And when you struck, the enemy had to make a fortitude save or they'd just be knocked prone. And it was like that. You could have built a whole character's persona around, like, I'm going to pick 2 of these stance type things and play a character, and maybe me and the DM will make up a whole, like, monastery or temple that practices these specific things. There was all of this room to customize a character. And I don't feel like any other class ever got half the care that monks did with feats. Feats were still fun, but I think when most class abilities felt kind of dull, outside of the things that specifically could only be done by that class, like only the druid and the ranger could take an animal companion. You just couldn't do it otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Only the rogue could get sneak attack. I know it's some editions later on have feats like dirty fighting and whatnot where you could get like 1d4 or maybe 1d6
Oh.
added. But it didn't. There was no like stacking bonus as you leveled. It was just, and you couldn't keep investing in dirty fighting over and over and over to add like 2d6 and 3d6. The feats helped, but because they were still locked to the class, if you weren't playing a class that had interesting abilities, the feats didn't do enough to help you distinguish unless you were one of those few classes like a monk. Or possibly, I think in later editions, or in splat books like for Pathfinder, Paladin got some cool ones where they got like various holy orders.
Mm-hmm.
They got a little bit closer to the second edition Paladin that automatically generated like magic, anti-magic bubbles when they picked up magic swords, because you gotta fight evil.
You gotta.
You have to. But if you were a wizard, it was like, oh, okay, at what level am I going to begin investing 3 feats in item creation?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
If anyone in the group is going to make items, I'm going to have to invest these points. Or at what level do I decide that I have to start taking like meta magic feats? And if I remember correctly, in at least certain editions, the meta magic feats were just the same thing as the ranger and their dual wield. That the fighter would be like, oh, at level 5 you get a meta magic feat, and it has to be from this list. Oh, at level 10 you get a meta magic feat, and it also has to be from this list. So again, rather than making class abilities more interesting, they put feats in as like a band-aid, which is the term that we continue to use.
Yeah.
In that they recognized that there was something missing in your ability as a player to creatively enjoy the character you were playing. And they have feats, and there's some cool feats, and there are some beneficial feats that, like, improved initiative isn't cool, right? It's not some snazzy ability, but you know it's going to help.
Oh, it's so great.
But it just, like, it doesn't do enough in a class system to differentiate. So 5th edition, you had mentioned at the end there, 5th edition sort of got rid of feats. Not entirely. It's listed in the 5th edition book as a fully optional system. You could go from level 1 to level 20 without ever taking a feat, and the only way that you get it, playing by rules as written for 5th edition, is to give up one of your ability modifier bonuses every like 4 levels and to pick a feat instead. And the feats don't seem significantly better. And a character, even in 3.5 or Pathfinder, already got an ability boost every 4 levels to begin with, but they also got feats. So in 5th edition, you get the ability boost or a feat. It seems like you're right. I think feats only exist because people from 3rd edition and earlier would complain if they got rid of them entirely. But I wouldn't be surprised if you had a group of brand new players and no one took feats or really understood what they did unless the DM was like, hey, you could also do this. Because people are very much wrapped up in the like, oh, I'm going to pick a class, and rather than playing this archetype of fighter, I'm going to pick this other archetype of fighter. In the end, the differences are somewhat minimal, and I think over time, anyone that does that will see it. But most of these new people, feats, they're really not for them. Right? Like, I don't think they were designed that way, at least. I'm not saying they can't use them.
No, so I'm looking at the feats right now, and it's pretty terrible. I mean, there's really nothing good to say about it. A lot of them here are the very first thing they do is they increase an ability score by 1, so charisma, strength, intelligence, and the idea of that being is because what you would normally do, the non-optional version, whatever the hell that was, would normally do that too. So I think they're trying to be like, you're not nerfing yourself by choosing this. You're still going to be able to pick more or less a an ability score to raise by 1. I don't know how often you get these. I think it's just every level, right? No, every at certain levels. Never mind. So
Yep.
it's not even all the
Yep.
time, which is fine. It doesn't need to be every level. But a lot of this is it reminds me of the analogy we are talking about like the dragon hunter fighter prestige class. This is sort of the band-aid for prestige classes that don't scale. So I choose, let's say I'm going to choose, I know the campaign's only going up to level 12, which is weird that I would know that, but I just know it's going to go to about level 12 because my DM always stops it around that level.
Or
Because
you
things
know what? A lot of the pre-made adventures that people play have level designs for them. So you might
yeah.
know this module only goes to level 5, or we're starting at 5 and it goes to
Yeah.
12. So
So
you might realistically actually know that from the outset.
yeah, so I say I want to specialize in something. I want to be good because the only reason you would choose these feats is to literally be different again, because otherwise you're going to have the same exact things as everybody else and you'll be great. You'll be a great fighter, but you'll be a fighter. That's what you are. That's what you get to be, and that's your life. So there's ones like being good at mounted combat. So I remember we had a player at one time be he was a he was a paladin. I think he was a mounted lance using paladin, and he would use like holy strike on demons, and he'd do like the crazy 4 times damage a long time ago.
With the
And it was super
lance.
great. Yeah, with the lance, it was super awesome, and he role played it like super well. So you can take a few feats. So I could take myself out of the normal system and take a few feats to be a little bit better at it. And by a little bit better, I mean I gain advantage when I do stuff like this, which I think is like advantage is the thing that procs a sneak attack or I don't know, gives me like a couple extra hit point or hit dice to hit someone or a couple, +2, +4. I don't actually know because 5th edition is retarded, but so I'm essentially doing what would be like a prestige class, but a terrible version of it. I don't get any of the fun flavor text that comes with a prestige class. This is literally just worse. And I'm essentially choosing to be, again, worse than the normal fighter for this one specialization. So I have to be doing mounted combat. If I find myself in a cave, I'm screwed. And again, a lot of people could say, like, oh, this is how a classless system would work if you specialize, but no, not necessarily. Because what they're doing is because you're already so restricted, and then you have to restrict it even more, it's just a funnel. Like, you can't open it back up. It has to keep going down. Whereas in a class system, it's so open, even if you close it a little bit, it's so much more open. Like, you have more room all the way through. If that analogy makes sense for people. I had it in
Well,
my brain. I don't know if it
in the
translates super
classless
well.
system, you're always free to branch out in a completely different direction anytime
Right.
you level up.
Yeah, and you can choose 1 or 2 things to be really good at, but you can still have a lot of other stuff, right? You can be someone who's a fighter with, you know, with sneak attack. Like, it's not an unheard of thing. And you still use a sword and a shield and all sorts of crazy shit. But you also decided I want a sneak attack. But yeah, these feats in 5th edition are probably one of the worst band-aids I've seen. I hate to say it because I know they put an attempt on it, and I sort of appreciate that because I told you I ran a 5th edition campaign for a little bit, a few months. I didn't even know feats existed. I was talking to people, and I told the people who were the players, listen, I'm very not used to this. Typically play Pathfinder. I will play 5th edition because you guys want it so bad. But here's the things I'm going to add. So I homebrewed it a little bit, and I added a lot of feats, and I gave it to all the players. Turns out none of them chose it, and then when they fought someone who ended up having improved initiative, they got their asses kicked, and they wondered why. And I was like, well, it turns out they were playing in a system that was a little bit better than yours, because you guys just choose to use the worst one. It seems silly, and it seems like I was a bad DM, but at the same time, it's like, clearly there was a better way. They changed it. It's now worse. People don't understand why it's worse, and they want to give him the illusion of choice again, but it's still bad, and it sucks.
Do you think that that 5th edition would be better if it had the feats that already exist in 5th edition if they existed alongside the stat increases?
So if you think so, basic, I'll make it a little bit more like Pathfinder. So you still have your abilities, and then you just add feats.
Yeah,
Every third level.
if you had a feat, it could be even the same levels, like 4, 8, 12,
Hmm.
16, 20. If on those levels you got a stat boost and you got a feat, would that be better, or do you think that would not go far enough? Like, would the feats still be lacking even when you got them essentially for free, like you
Yeah, I
used
mean,
to?
it would be both. It would be better. It would be better than the current system they have, but it's still terrible. Like, it still doesn't solve the. It's back to Pathfinder. They have the feats to be different from other people, so there is that. I will give them the fact that, you can be inherently slightly different than the other fighter because you chose different feats. But how much different are you really? Like, okay, I chose to have this mounted fighter, mounted riding ability. All that gave me was an advantage, whatever the hell that is, an advantage in, mounted attacks. Is that
It
really
yeah.
like? Does that feel powerful? Does that feel fun? Not
Well,
really.
yeah,
Like,
well, normal. So fifth edition advantage is a slight bonus to hit. It's essentially the same type of bonus you'd get from flanking or from striking someone unawares, which I think
hmm
I haven't run a fifth edition game, and so I don't mean to speak like incorrectly here. I think advantage is a status given in those situations rather than the bonuses that used to exist, just to make it the same thing across the board. Like when you're flanking someone, you don't get the flanking bonus, you get advantage on them. When you
mm,
strike them when they're unawares, you don't take their dexterity bonus to dodge off anymore. You give advantage to the hit. And
oh,
in that system, I do see the benefit of making it flat across the board. Uh, but at the same time, it also means like you're getting the same advantage on a person regardless of whether they are the most dexterous fighter in the game or they're someone that wouldn't have dodged the hit to begin with.
yeah.
Um,
So I looked it up real quick. Advantage, you get to roll two dice, and you pick the higher of the two
yep.
if you have advantage, and you pick the lower if you don't have advantage. So that just doesn't happen. So that obviously just wasn't a thing, and you
Yep.
would just get a small inherent bonus in like the old Pathfinder system.
Yep.
Whereas in this one, okay, I, again, it's not
Do,
enough. It's not. It doesn't make me feel better.
does it seem
Like,
like so in place of feats, fifth edition is giving people the stat bonus increase, but they also are the first edition of D&D that has put hard caps on stats.
hmm
Does it seem like the wrong direction to be going to say at one time we've basically gotten rid of feats. You can do it if you want, but it's optional. And in place of that, you can increase stats, but there's a hard cap. If you're a specific type of class, like a barbarian at level 18 or 20, like you get an ability that raises your strength and your constitution caps.
hmm
I believe there are similar abilities for other classes. Does it seem strange, like, if unless you started with very middling stats, and I
hmm
played in one game with one DM ever, where people just had the kind of stats where like a 13 was your best score and your average was a 9. And in a system like that, everyone taking the plus 2 to two different stats when they leveled, and there being a cap makes sense, except you wouldn't need the cap. Like, no one would have made it past 20 to
Yeah,
begin with.
yeah.
But giving people a bonus and then saying, here's a cap, seems like they're either expecting you to start with lower stats, or they're expecting when you do reach the cap in the stats that matter to your class, uh, that you will just simply start investing in stats that aren't as important to your class. Like if you're a fighter and you started the game with 14 strength, and then you get to 20, and it's like, okay, where
Getting Constitution.
you put two into strength and you put two into con. Each time you had the choice, you have 20 in both. I guess you
Dexterity.
dexterity and intelligence
Wisdom.
or
Yeah,
wisdom.
wisdom for perception. Who knows?
Yeah, whatever it may be.
Yeah,
It seems strange to add
yeah.
something and then limit it in the exact same like swoop that you were like, you can do this new thing, but not too much.
Yeah, and then and if these feats do give you ability scores, I would literally not choose a feat because I'm not getting the maximum amount. If I already have 20 strength, I want this thing to give me advantage, but I already have 20 strength. I'm losing half the value of this feat. So it just pushes me more in a corner to have to be different in a way I don't even want to be now. Now you're choosing for me, Wizards. I hate it. Don't do that.
Okay. All right. Well, so we've given a sort of a mixed review of feats. We loved them when we were first learning to play the game in third edition through Pathfinder. Fourth edition did a terrible job of trying to make a World of Warcraft tabletop game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, fifth edition is sort of a strange halfway point that doesn't seem to want to commit.
Yeah.
But uh, we can agree, feats are cool, but there were never enough for most classes to really make a difference. And the classes would have felt better if they just had class abilities that you could have chosen from, right?
Yep.
Would you
Yep.
rather have picked a random feat to increase your spot check as a rogue? Or would you rather have had different rogue paths that, like, this is the spy, and the spy gets bonuses to spot and listen when those were two separate things, and the
Yeah.
spy gets bonuses to this and that, as opposed to the assassin, as opposed to the criminal mastermind, as opposed to the thug, the sort of like variant classes that inevitably show up once an edition has been out long enough. Feel like they really should just be the way that it starts.
Yeah.
And then the feats that exist could just be a cherry on top of, like, oh, I'm going to take the one that improves initiative, or oh, I'm going to take the one that allows me to use bows, or as a rogue I can now use a longbow. I've got proficiency in it, and it'd just be little tweaks, which we're going to talk about it on Thursday or Friday, whichever day we come back for episode 2, but that is more the position that has been taken with Sundered Ages, is feats are little tweaks. They're there to detail the character out in a small way every single level. And that instead of the classes, the abilities are tied to the skills you have. Just as like a little preview of what we're going to be talking about then. But yeah, unfortunately, feats, I think, at the end of the day, it feels like another Band-Aid. It feels like really cool ideas that people at Wizards and Paizo had, and just not knowing how to do it in a better way, and maybe by the time you got to 3.5, it was so set that they were unwilling to change it. They changed it big time in 4th edition. People didn't like it, and then in 5th edition they just sidelined them and said, like, if you're really interested you could do it, but we're not committed to this anymore. I feel like when a 6th edition comes out, I don't expect there to be feats at all.
Yeah, I don't expect it to be there either, and it's sad, but I think that's also the way the game is going. Is they're taking a little bit less to get more people. I think what they're trying to do is cater to the new audience more than to the old people, because old people will hold on. The old players will hold on through thick and thin, even if they hate it. We still play D&D. We play our own version. We play Sundered Ages. We don't actually play D&D. We play Sundered Ages. We play tabletop. But it's sad that it came to that, because they had great ideas. They just never followed through with them, or they just dropped them entirely. And I think they're going to just try a new route with 6th edition too. So
yeah, well, you know what? The increasing popularity of tabletop games will cause all boats to rise equally. So
yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah. Their losses are benefit, though, because we found a good way to do it.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to add before we stop for today?
I don't think so. I think that was a good one. There was a bit of hope in my voice about feats. Obviously, because we still love them. We've transposed them into Sundered Ages, what I think quite well. So it's not that we hate feats. This is one of the things that we kept and we love. We just did it the right way.
Good idea, bad implementation.
Bad implementation. So yeah, Thursday we'll talk about how we implemented it.
We'll take good idea, good implementation.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's where we're going to cut it off for tonight, and we will be back on Thursday.
See you guys then.